Data Science Rabbit podcast with Michael Bagelman.
How many zombies do you know? How many zombies are there? Welcome back to the Data Science Rabbit podcast. This is Layla Jameson, filling in for Michael, and with me today is the data scientist nonpareil, Cornelius P. Snarkington. Thanks so much for being here.
Layla, it's always a pleasure to emerge from the depths of data science to entertain such delightful questions.
Please enlighten us about this paper, How Many Zombies Do You Know, by Andy Gelman. How do we measure the zombie population?
Yes, Gelman's work. An elegant piece of statistical wizardry, if ever there was one. The method in question is called the network scale-up technique. Now, instead of the rather suicidal endeavor of trying to directly count zombies, because, let's be honest, head counts tend to get complicated when the heads are rolling, we take a safer approach. We ask regular people, blissfully unaware of the impending apocalypse, about their social networks.
Okay, but how does asking about social networks help us count zombies?
Therein lies the cleverness. You see, we begin with the mundane, the trivial, questions like, how many people named Sarah do you know? Or, how many teachers are in your social circle? These groups have known population sizes, and this allows us to estimate the overall size of your network. A bit of statistical sleight of hand, if you will.
I see. So if I know 10 Sarahs, and Sarahs make up about 1% of the population, you might estimate I know about 1,000 people total?
Precisely. You've grasped the heart of the matter. And then we hit you with the real question, the one that separates the living from the soon-to-be undead. How many zombies do you know?
I get it. So if I said I knew 5 zombies out of my network of 1,000 people, you could extrapolate that to the whole population.
Spot on, my dear. That's the idea. By asking enough people these questions, without ever having to get too close to the actual gnashing of teeth, we can arrive at a reliable estimate of the zombie population. It's statistical brilliance that keeps one's brain right where it belongs, in one's head, not in the hands of the undead.
Fascinating. But wait, wouldn't people be reluctant to admit they know zombies?
Now you've struck at the heart of the matter, Layla. Naturally, there's a bit of reluctance, shall we say, in admitting one's associations with the undead. We account for that by asking about other rare, or shall we say, socially uncomfortable groups. This helps us estimate how much people might be underreporting and make corrections accordingly. It's all very scientific, of course, despite the morbid subject matter.
Clever. Are there any other benefits to this method?
Absolutely. Beyond just estimating the size of the zombie horde, we can glean fascinating details. Their geographic distribution, for example. Who's most likely to encounter these creatures? How fast is the infection spreading? If we repeat the survey over time, we can even map the pace of the outbreak. It's an epidemiologist's dream, albeit a somewhat nightmarish one.
This is amazing, Cornelius. It sounds like we can learn a lot about the zombie apocalypse from the safety of a phone survey.
Quite right. It's a marvel of modern methodology, a technique that allows us to study dangerous, hard-to-reach populations from a safe distance, all without requiring any direct interaction with, decaying flesh.
Well, listeners, there you have it. The next time someone asks you if you know any zombies, remember, you might be contributing to vital apocalypse research.
Indeed, just be sure to report your findings with the utmost accuracy. We must, after all, do it for science.
Thank you, Cornelius P. Snarkington, for this enlightening discussion. Listeners, stay tuned for a discussion of Gelman's paper from the Notebook LM Deep Dive team.
Okay, so this week's reading list was, well, let's just say it was a bit unusual.
Unusual? You think? I'm not sure I've ever seen so many academic papers on zombies outside of, Halloween.
Right. News articles, blog posts. It's like someone hit the mother lode of all things undead. But hey, That's what we do here, right? We dive headfirst into the research no matter how strange it seems. And this time it looks like we're knee-deep in zombie apocalypse prep.
Well, before we start stocking up on canned goods and, fortifying our homes, it's important to note that this goes beyond just outrunning the undead. This paper we're looking at uses the idea of a zombie outbreak to tackle a very real problem in social science research.
Okay, so, if there actually was a zombie apocalypse happening right now, as we speak, our usual ways of figuring things out, surveys and polls, wouldn't really work, would they?
Exactly. It's not like you could just, call up a zombie and ask them about their daily routine or their voting preferences, and good luck getting a zombie to answer the door for a pollster.
Yeah, not exactly the most cooperative research subjects, but, it's more than just zombies, right? This applies to any group that's tough to get information on.
Absolutely. Think about undocumented immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, even folks living in really remote or dangerous parts of the world. Traditional data collection methods, they often miss these populations completely.
And I'm guessing not having accurate data on those groups, it creates some pretty big challenges, right?
Huge challenges. We're talking about basic things like allocating resources, developing effective social programs. You can't do any of that effectively if you don't have a clear picture of who you're trying to help and what their needs are.
Right, of course. So we've got a problem. How do you count the uncountable? How do you understand a group that's practically invisible to traditional research methods? Well, these researchers, they propose a pretty interesting solution. Instead of trying to reach these hard-to-reach populations directly, they suggest we borrow a page from other fields. Yeah. They want us to look at, wait for it, social networks.
Fascinating stuff, really. It's all about leveraging those connections. See, instead of trying to count a population directly, you ask a more accessible group about their links to that population. Think of it like this. Let's say there's a zombie outbreak, right? And you know someone, and that person knows someone else, and that person knows someone who actually got bitten. Well, suddenly you have a chain of connections that tells you something about the potential spread of the outbreak.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. But how do you go from knowing a guy who knows a zombie to, actual usable data? That seems like a pretty big leap.
Well, that's where the power of networks comes in. These researchers, they point to a study where this method was actually used to estimate the size of the prison population. Now, they didn't try to survey prisoners directly, which, logistically speaking, would be pretty difficult. Instead, they asked people in the general population, how many prisoners do you personally know?
Asking people about prisoners to, get a sense of the prison population, that seems, kind of roundabout, doesn't it?
Yeah, it might seem that way at first, but it's actually a lot more effective than you might think. So the average person, they know about 750 other people.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It is. It's a pretty big network, right? So even if only, a tiny fraction of those 750 connections are incarcerated, you're still talking about a significant amount of data. You ask, say, 1,500 people that same question, and suddenly you're gathering data on a network of over 1 million individuals.
Okay, I think I get it now. So, even if I only know one person who is incarcerated, that data point, it's not just about me and that one person. It actually contributes to this much larger data set that can then paint a picture of the entire prison population.
Exactly, like a ripple effect, right? Each individual connection, even if it seems distant, it all adds up. And the really cool thing is that this approach, it's not limited to just prisons. You could apply the same logic to, our zombie outbreak scenario.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking that. So even if, out of all the people you surveyed, only a handful of them actually know someone who's had a run-in with a zombie.
Right. You can take that data, extrapolate outward, factor in the average person's network size.
And bam! You've got a much clearer sense of how widespread this whole zombie situation might actually be.
Exactly. It really highlights how interconnected we all are, even in ways we don't always think about.
Yeah, it's a little bit creepy if you think about it too much.
Just a bit.
But okay, so we've got this network approach, which is pretty cool. But the researchers, they didn't stop there, did they? They took this idea of indirect measurement even further.
You're right. They started looking at other unconventional sources of information, things that on the surface seem completely unrelated, but when you dig a little deeper, they can actually tell us quite a bit.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, they're particularly interested in Google Trends data.
Wait, Google Trends, like what we're all typing into Google.
Exactly. See, they suggested that sudden spikes in searches for zombie or other, zombie-related terms.
Okay, I gotta be honest, this is where my brain starts to break a little bit. We're talking about analyzing zombie movies and TV shows to, like, predict real-world events.
Well, not just movies and TV shows. Those are definitely part of it. But you're on the right track.
Yeah.
The researchers, they basically proposed that these spikes in searches, they could be a sign, like maybe a sign that people are feeling anxious or, that there's some kind of underlying fear or concern bubbling up in the collective consciousness.
Okay, so I can see how, like, a sudden surge in people Googling how to survive a zombie apocalypse, yeah, that might be a bit of a red flag, but couldn't that just be because, I don't know, a new zombie video game came out? Or maybe, like, The Walking Dead finally aired its series finale?
Right. And that's always the challenge with this kind of data, right? You've got to be able to separate the signal from the noise, figure out the context behind the trends. But the underlying idea here, it's sound, because researchers are already using Google Trends data, and they're doing some pretty amazing things with it.
So we're basically talking about, like, using our cultural obsession with zombies as a kind of, I don't know, a barometer for what's really going on in the world.
In a way, yes. It's like, think about it, a sudden spike in people searching for zombie survival gear. It might not mean we're on the verge of a real-life zombie apocalypse.
Right.
But it could indicate a rise in anxiety about something. A natural disaster, social unrest, a pandemic.
It's like we're tapping into some kind of collective unconscious, but instead of a therapist's couch, it's like Google's search bar.
Exactly. It's the digital age's version of reading tea leaves, right? But instead of tea leaves, it's search terms and the patterns they reveal.
Wild. But you said earlier that researchers are already using this Google Trends thing for more than just, zombie-related anxieties. What else are they looking at?
Oh, all sorts of things. One really promising area is using Google Trends data to actually predict flu outbreaks. So think about it. What's one of the first things people do when they start feeling sick?
Google their symptoms, of course.
Exactly. And researchers have found that by tracking those searches, things like flu symptoms, fever remedies, that sort of thing, they can actually get a pretty accurate picture of where and when flu outbreaks are happening.
Wow, really? So, like, before doctors are even seeing a surge in patients?
Exactly. We're talking days, sometimes even weeks before official reports come in.
That's incredible. So we could potentially predict real-world events that affect real people, all based on what we're typing into a search bar.
It sounds crazy, but yeah, that's essentially it. And it's not just limited to, public health either. Imagine tracking patterns of social unrest, monitoring economic trends, even getting a sense of public opinion on political issues, all through the lens of Google searches.
So it's like taking the pulse of society in real time, just by paying attention to what people are Googling. Man, who knew zombies could be so insightful? What started as this kind of, far-out thought experiment about a zombie apocalypse, it's actually given us a whole new way of looking at data, at research, at the world around us.
I know. It's a perfect example of how sometimes the most valuable insights, they come from the most unexpected places. And it really underscores something crucial about research in general.
What's that?
Sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries, they don't come from just looking harder at what we already know. Sometimes it's about shifting our perspective, looking at things in a whole new way. And who knows what other unconventional data sources are out there, just waiting for someone to connect the dots.
That's something to think about. And on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this deep dive. But hey, listeners, we want to hear from you. What other unconventional data sources are you curious about? Hit us up on social media, let us know your thoughts, and who knows, maybe your idea will be the starting point for our next deep dive. Until then, stay curious.
This has been the Data Science Rabbit Podcast, hosted by Michael Bagelman. Find the Data Science Rabbit Podcast on all your favorite social media, including YouTube and TikTok. Follow Michael on LinkedIn or visit datasciencerabbithole.com.